So we'll now go to Professor Gabriel Maino, a professor of jurisprudence at the Pontifical University, a Catholic Pontifical University in Argentina. And he will now discuss the social dimension of human rights in the light of the natural law. Gabriel Maino is a senior professor of legal philosophy, so at the university, the Catholic University of Argentina, associate professor at University of Buenos Aires. He's the author of a number of books and articles in academic journals in different languages and countries. His research focuses on natural law and education policies. So, Professor Maino, the floor is yours.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. On October 23rd, 1978, when becoming the Bishop of Rome, St. John Paul II addresses a letter to the Polish people. This is not a diplomatic letter. Instead, it reveals the feelings of a man touched by the mission awaiting him and by having to leave his homeland. In the letter he wrote, "Love of our country unites us and must unite us above all divergences. It springs from the law of the human heart. It is a measure of man's ability, a measure that has been put to the test many times during our difficult history." And he urged his fellow countrymen to oppose everything that conflicts with human dignity and degrades the morals of a healthy society. That may sometimes threaten its very existence and the common good, that may diminish our contribution to the common heritage of humanity, of Christian nations, of the Church of Christ. End of the quote. I would like to focus on two issues resulting from this fragment. The first is that the love for the homeland results from the law of the human heart, which is another way of saying of natural law. The second is that respect for the human person is aimed at the common good and the health of society. The teachings of St. John Paul II about the family and the Charter of the Rights of the Family in particular focus on the social dimension of human rights from the perspective of the natural law and the common good. The Charter starts with a preamble containing this assertion, I quote, "The right of the person, even though they are expressed as rights of the individual, have a fundamental social dimension which finds an innate and vital expression in the family." End of the quote. I will briefly develop on why this approach is necessary and what its importance is for an appropriate philosophy of human rights. The human person is a corporeal spiritual being endowed with the superior abilities of intelligence and free will, what we call rationality. As the psalm goes, the human person is a little lower than the angels. But the flourishing of these higher capabilities or powers demands an appropriate context, which is solidary existence with other human beings. The human being is a political animal, son politikon, because he is a rational animal, son logotikon, and the other way around. In fact, the individual existence of a human being is inconceivable. Solitary or individual human life is not possible, and there is no historical record that such an existence have ever taken place. The human being can only fully develop himself within his own social and political framework. The triple order of human inclinations condensed under the Summa Theologiae Prima Secundae, question 94, article 2, covers not only the tendencies or capabilities of which contemporary use naturalism bases human rights, such as life, property, or freedom of worship, but also their sociability or solidarity. The social calling of man is expressed by multiple societies, such as the nuclear one, the family, and the most perfect one, political society, nowadays called the state. The political society is necessary because it allows us to take part in the common good. Without it, we cannot reach our full life. From the point of view of metaphysics, the state is an accidental entity, which belongs to the accident of relation. It is a set of relationships occurring in common human activity aimed at the common good. But human sociability does not end with the state of small societies. The social nature of man is expressed in multiple ways, the first and most important of which is the family, and then there is an array of intermediate societies, such as the city, the school, the university, the union, and many others with their different purposes. For the effective enforcement of human rights, these intermediate societies play a fundamental role, as they are more successful than the declarations with which individualism tried to replace them. To attain that purpose, and for those small societies to succeed in their own activities, a legal and political organization must embrace the principle of subsidiarity. This principle balances the need of authority at different levels, respecting the specific fields of families and intermediate societies and groups. In this way, the state allows them to achieve their goals, as well as supports them when necessary, and can even assume and develop what common good claims. Denying this principle brings people into a non-human existence, into the anonymity of the mass, controlled by the powerful whoever they are, the state, international corporations, social media. This is the reason why any anthropology denying human sociability is conceptually mistaken and empirically counterfactual. However, in our Western culture, the myth has spread of the lonely man in the forest, like Tarzan. This myth comes from the Indo-European antiquity and is nothing but a fantasy. We are discussing something that can be imagined, but cannot be thought of. Unfortunately, in modern culture, the idea has spread like a virus, something invisible that transforms our vision of human life. In fact, it has been asserted that the social and political way of life is not natural or essential to mankind, but artificial. Such is the degree of fantasy of this assertion that there are no major differences between a tale such as The Jungle Book of Rudyard Kipling and texts like Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The origin of this error has to do with many causes. Such changes in the culture can never be explained based on a single fact or the ideas of a thinker, no matter how influential the thinker may be. But as the human person is little lower than the angels, the power of his intelligence and will, even if mistaken or evil, is very strong. Man has tried to turn into reality that myth. In a way, it was an attempt to satisfy that desire to be like God, an individual on his own, pure, self-sufficient, capable of his own perfection. The consequences of the resulting individualism are theological, philosophical, political, legal, educational, and economic. A large part of Western legal and political theory, even in Catholic thinking, is influenced by the individualism. It is so invisible and rooted in our culture that we can even assert that all of us are, in one way or another, individualists. But it should not be understood that when discussing individualism, I am only considering a particular ideology, because it's a whole philosophical and theological matrix that goes from libertarianism to neo-Marxism. This is the modern revolution, whereby man is exalted over God. It's actually a denial process, first of metaphysics, then of the Church, then of Christ, then of God, then of speculative truth, then of moral truth, then of beauty, with contemporary meaningless art, and then of man himself, turning man into an epiphenomenon of economy, of the state, and lately, of technology. In fact, Gnosticism nowadays is expressed by the denial of every natural order and ultimately by transhumanism and posthumanism. I believe I am not mistaken in asserting that this explanation I just gave is a correct conceptual framework for human rights. Human rights would then be a Gnostic concept which denies the social and political dimension of the person, of any truth, and the human essential dependence of God. But it is also truth that the declarations of human rights in Constitution and international treaties were also inspired by the knowledge of natural law as recognized throughout the centuries, especially by the Catholic tradition. Many of the men who have taken part in the political processes of the declarations of human rights, both in Europe and the Americas, before and after the Second World War, were part of this tradition. Therefore, we could say there is a continuity between the tradition of natural law and human rights, which may be identified as mixed, just like the wheat and the tares, with the Gnostic and individualistic one. The Catholic Church has voiced its concern regarding this aspect of human rights from the outset. Then, in the light of natural law, the Church recognized the importance of human rights in our social and political organization. We must approach the notion of human rights, human dignity, and especially St. John Paul II Charter of the Right of the Family with these lights and warnings. But during the long pontificate of St. John Paul II, the agenda of denial of man had already unleashed furiously, and that agenda is still active to these days. St. John Paul II responded in many ways to this challenge, among them by calling a synod, as a result of which the Apostolic Exhortation Familiaris Consortio was published. Then the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family was established, and the Charter of the Rights of the Family was granted. The 20th century has offered Catholics a diabolic choice relative to human rights and the family. If modern individualism is against human nature and the most essential theological truth of faith, so is the oppression of totalitarian political movements. This is a false dichotomy, as if we Catholics had to choose between individualism promoting a minimum state or totalitarianism of the multiple versions of Marxism and the political projects of the liberal left. These are categories of the world, but we Catholics are in the world, yet we do not belong to the world. Jesus Christ is the truth that set us free, and he shows us with his passion, death, and resurrection the solitary nature of our existence. Sin came to the world through one man, and one man is giving salvation. If we want to recover the Christian roots of our civilization, as St. John Paul II insisted, this is a very important step in the recovery. This solidarity is first expressed in the family. Therefore, the denial of the human being in the modern revolution is especially realized by destroying the family. The family is destroyed by breaking the bond between spouses through divorce, annulling their fertility through contraception and abortion, establishing social and economic structures which make family life impossible, and dispersing family members through gender ideology, which puts women against men and children against parents. On this point, individualism and neo-Marxism, in their different expressions, match perfectly. This deconstruction was developed being respect of human rights the most frequent used argument. The Charter of the Rights of the Family by St. John Paul II is showing us how to avoid this tragedy. The family expresses the social dimension of human rights. It's where the generational encounter takes place, as well as mutual help teaches us how to balance individual necessities with the demands of social life. Is the school of solidarity, and where virtues are acquired and transmitted, which will guide interpersonal relations in political life. Among the addresses, including in the Apostolic Exhortation and the Charter, there seems to be special concern for those families that have come uncertain and confused over their role and even doubtful of the meaning and truth of marriage and family life. The Charter is a prophecy, as the situation has only got worse in the last 40 years. To end up with, I would like to highlight some aspects that help us find orientation in the midst of so much injustice. First, resorting to a charter of rights does not mean giving up the conception of law understood as what we owe each other for the sake of justice. This way, the Church is adopting the language of legal instruments which are internationally accepted, but without relinquish the truth about what is due to the family in accordance with justice and common good. Second, While now it is frequent to speak of different models of family, the Charter details the essence of family and the purpose of marriage. Third, the Charter states that the family has the right to exist and condemns the serious evil of divorce. Sadly, this is a debate that has been abandoned for many decades. One day, it has to be recovered if we want to have legal orders truly just. Fourth, contrary to the practice in international organizations and the so-called New World Order, the Charter establishes that international assistance can never be conditioned on the acceptance of contraception, sterilization, or abortion programs. Fifth, families must be able to avoid the throwaway culture of the consumer society regarding the elderly, orphans, migrants, and the disabled, banning abortion and euthanasia. Sixth, family is the natural educational environment. Education is then a primary and original right of the parents. The state cannot encroach upon this right on moral and religious questions, including advocating sexual education or imposing secularist education. The idea is not to leave us alone, or a duty not to interfere, but the state must also ensure that everyone can educate their children in accordance with those beliefs, as a comprehensive education promotes the common good. Seventh, finally, some comments are appropriate in connection with the last articles of the Charter. It is important to state this clearly. No family can enjoy these rights if the parents do not have a job. No solidarity can there be in families with no stable place where to live their lives. Natural law demands rights and duties in connection with the specific protection of family life and implies the assistance of the states and its legal system when circumstances so demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor.